Hey guys, so let's go ahead and go over some inequality symbols and rules for your quiz. The first thing that we want to talk about is what these symbols mean. So this first symbol here, we read this as less than. Okay, it kind of looks like an L if you think about it sideways, or look at it a little sideways. Less than, when we graph it, would be an open circle, and if our numbers are getting smaller, we're shading to the left on a number line. This next symbol is for greater than. Again, it's an open circle. Greater than means our numbers are getting bigger. The two on the right over here have lines underneath, which means our solution wants to include that number. So we say this as less than or equal to. And the difference would be, this is a closed circle. Again, you'd still be shading to the left. And this is greater than or equal to. Again, closed circle, and we're shading to the right. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do, and we're going to jump around in these notes, is let's just talk about how we read these. When we're reading these and graphing these, we always want to start reading with a variable. So I would read this as x is greater than 5. So on my number line, I would label 5. It's an open circle, and greater than gets shaded to the right. This next one is x is less than negative 2. So again, I'm going to label negative 2. It's an open circle, shading to the left. X is less than or equal to negative 3. Because it has the or equal sign, that's going to be a closed circle. Again, we're still shading to the left. Okay? I want you to pay particular attention to this one. So what's different about this fourth one is my variable is on the right-hand side. So some of you may be okay at reading this backwards. Again, we always start out reading with the variable, so I would start reading as x, and I have to read this backwards, is greater than or equal to 4. That can be confusing for some of you guys. So my suggestion is that if you see your variable on the right-hand side, rewrite it with your variable and your number switch. Just know that if you change the order, you are also going to flip this sign. So instead of less than or equal to, it's greater than or equal to. So this means we would have a closed circle, and we're shading to the right. Okay. One thing you're going to need to do with inequalities is be able to solve them. So we solve inequalities just like we do equations using inverse operations. So inverse operations are basically opposite. So the inverse of addition is subtraction. The inverse of multiplication is division. And you are doing this in order to isolate the variable or get the variable by itself. So if I look at this first inequality, x plus 3 is greater than 5. When I'm thinking about sides, I'm thinking of sides of the inequality sign. I want to get x by itself. So in order to get x by itself, I have to undo this plus 3. So the opposite of adding 3 would be to subtract 3. And if I subtract 3 on one side, I have to subtract 3 on the other. Okay, 3 minus 3 cancels out. I would bring down my x. I'm going to bring down my inequality sign. 5 minus 3 is 2. Okay, so again, I'm going to go ahead and label 2 on my number line. This is an open circle, and it's greater than, so I'm shading to the right. Looking at number 2, I want to isolate or get the x by itself, and I can read this as x divided by 3. Okay, using inverse operations, the opposite of division is multiplication. So I need to multiply both sides by 3. My 3's are going to cancel out because I can cross cancel top to bottom. I bring down my x. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. And it's okay if my answer is negative. Okay, some of you may be thinking ahead to our rule when you multiply or divide with negative numbers. Okay, so that's going to be a closed circle. I'm shading to the left. Number 3, I notice my variable is on the right-hand side. So I have two options. I could solve it like it is and then switch my answer. I'll go ahead and I'll do that. Or I'll show you one other thing you could do. So I want to get x by itself, so that means I need to undo subtracting 2. The opposite of subtraction is addition. So that's going to cancel. 4 plus 2 is 6. And then I'm noticing my variable is on the right-hand side. So if I want to switch the order, I need to flip my sign. So it's going to go from greater than to less than. Okay. If right away you don't like solving with the variable on the right, you can always rewrite the inequality right away. So if I want to put this quantity and switch the order from left to right, I can do that as long as I switch my sign. So I would rewrite them, the x minus 2 on the left-hand side, 4 on the right-hand side. I'm going to switch my sign to less than. So notice I solve it the same way. Okay, number 4, I undo multiplication with division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. Those are pretty straightforward. Okay, so the one thing that you need to remember, our rule for solving inequalities, is if you multiply or divide when solving by a negative number, you must flip your sign. Okay, I'll show you what that means. This is very important. This is kind of the one difference or one addition to our rules that we have to add on to when solving equations. Okay, so right here, if I have negative 3 times x is greater than 9, well, I want to get the x by itself. This is multiplication, and I undo multiplication with division. So I'm dividing by a negative. So, okay, I'm dividing by a negative number, so that means I need to flip my sign. So I do my math the exact same way. 9 divided by negative 3 is negative 3. But instead of greater than, I'm going to switch that to less than. Okay, it makes a difference. Notice if you had your answer as x is greater than, you'd be shading this way, which is incorrect. Our solutions need to be to the left. Okay, let's look at number 6. I have a fraction next to a variable, and I know that I don't divide by fractions. Instead, I multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of negative 2/3 is negative 3 over 2. Okay, so this cancels. I'm multiplying this time by a negative, so I flip my sign. So instead of greater than or equal to, it's going to change to less than or equal to. If you wanted to multiply here, you could go across the top, across the bottom, or you could cross cancel, which I'm going to do. So 2 goes into 6 3 times. 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. If you had multiplied out, you would have gotten negative 18 over 2, which is, again, negative 9. So it's going to be a closed circle, and we're shading to the left. Okay, negative 7. You can rewrite this. This is the same thing as negative 1x divided by 3. Okay, we need to solve for positive x, which means we need to divide by negative 1. Ding, ding, ding. We're dividing by a negative, so this greater than is going to change to a less than sign. Okay, last but not least for number 8, we're dividing by negative 2, which means the opposite of that is multiplying by negative 2. Again, we multiplied by a negative, so I'm going to switch my sign. Okay, those are one-step inequalities. You are also going to be required to do some 2 steps, so we'll do a few of these. Okay. Let's pick number 10. So number 10, I notice that my variable is on the right-hand side, so I know I'm going to be flipping at the end. So I'm going to put a star by that so I remember to do that. Okay. And again, actually, I also could flip right away. If you wanted to, you could rewrite the inequality like this. Okay, so that's one option. I'll go ahead and I'll solve. So if I want to get x by itself, my first step is to subtract 4. 2 minus 4 is negative 2. This is going to cancel. And then I undo multiplication with division. So I'm dividing by 2. It didn't divide by a negative. I'm dividing by a positive, so I don't need to flip my sign yet. But once I get down here, I do notice that my variable is on the right-hand side. I want it on the left, so I'm going to rewrite it, which makes me flip. So this is going to be a closed circle, and I'm shading to the right. Okay, let's go ahead and let's do number 12. So this is a two-step problem here. If I'm trying to get x by itself, I see -1. So the opposite of subtraction is addition. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. This x next to each other is multiplication, so I undo that with division. 10 divided by 5 is 2. Pretty straightforward. Okay, let's do another two-step down here. Okay, fraction next to a variable, and I'm subtracting 1. My first step would be to add 1 to both sides. 11. Oops, and this is actually, I'm going to change this to an inequality sign. I'm going to make that less than, just because we are solving inequalities. So there's less than. 11 plus 1 is 12. Fraction next to a variable, I don't divide by fractions. Instead, I multiply by the reciprocal. 3 goes into 12 4 times. 4 times 4 is 16. Or you could have said 12 times 4 is 48. 1 times 3 is 3. 48 divided by 3 is 16. Okay, let's do number 15. Again, I'm trying to get x by itself, so my first step is going to be to add 3 to both sides. Then I notice it's negative x, which is the same thing as negative 1x. I'm going to divide by -1. Ding, ding, ding. I'm dividing by a negative, which means I need to flip my sign. So it's going to go from less than or equal to greater than or equal to. Oops. And 8 divided by -1 is -8. Closed circle, and I'm shading to the right. Okay, and one other thing you're going to have to do on your quiz is you're going to have to write an inequality given a graph. Okay, so you have to be able to look at this. Okay, I know this is a closed circle, and I'm shading to the left. So I like to start out with my variable. Closed circle and shading to the left would be less than or equal to. Okay, I start with my variable. It's an open circle, and I'm shading to the right, so that would be greater than. Over here, I have my variable, open circle, shading to the right would again be greater than, and I'm always starting with the number that's right underneath that point. And then this is closed circle, shading to the right, so greater than or equal to -3. Okay. So that's pretty much the gist of how you go about solving. Review this. What I would also look over are the phrases. Look over your quiz. So when you hear the phrase, if you want to make at least a certain amount of money, know that at least means greater than or equal to. Okay, I hope this helped you. See you in class.